So when a lot of people talk about the Battle of Gettysburg, the major sites that are typically focused upon are typically south of the town, just about a mile south of town. Cemetery Ridge, Little Round Top, those are like the big highlights most visitors go. But there's a lot more stuff. There's Culp's Hill, East Cemetery Hill, which is actually part of town today. You have the whole north side of the battlefield of Oak Ridge, Barlow's Knoll. And another thing people forget is the Battle of Gettysburg, while you had the infantry of the Union Confederate fighting here for the first 3 days of July, you had small skirmishes with the cavalry for both sides occurred within several miles around the town. There was fighting up in Carlisle on July 1st. There was going to be fighting down near Fairfield on July 3rd. But probably the most crucial of these cavalry actions, these little satellite battles, is where we're at today. We're about 3 miles to the east of Gettysburg right now, and we're in a far looks just like nothing more than a farm field. But here in the afternoon of July 3rd, 1863, one of the most pivotal cavalry battles of the American Civil War occurred, and included what may consider the breakout performance of George Armstrong Custer. This is the action at East Cavalry Field. So why is there such a big action disconnected from the fighting around town? Well, it's not disconnected at all. What is happening here is, on the night of July 2nd, 1863, Jeb Stuart, in charge of the Confederate Cavalry Corps, has finally arrived, hooked up with Robert E. Lee. Now, Stuart had gone north of the Army of North Virginia to kind of screen their advance, but went a little too far north, to put it mildly. He became disconnected with the main Army of Northern Virginia. And while Stuart was out raiding places as far as Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, Lee is trying to cautiously move his way up into Pennsylvania and, well, bumps into what his men thought was initially some Union militia. Turned out to be a couple brigades of General Buford's cavalry who were dismounted, which turned into the 1st Corps of Joshua Reynolds, which just turned into the Battle of Gettysburg as we know it. So when Stuart gets into camp on the night of July 2nd, you can imagine Lee's a little bit crossed. So Stuart is going to be sent. I am being covered in crickets and stuff. I apologize in advance. We are surrounded by crickets and other insects. Anyways, Stuart, trying to make up to allow Lee to get blundered into a big battle, he is going to be sent out early on the morning of July 3rd to target supply lines of the Union line. And one of those supply lines is right behind me, the Hanover Road, and something more critical farther to our south, the Baltimore Pike. The Baltimore Pike is right behind the Union line along Cemetery Ridge. So Stuart's going to be out here doing some sparring, trying to threaten Union supply lines. Now, there is a myth that goes around that Stuart was sent out to attack the rear of the Union line during Pickett's charge. The Pickett's charge is supposed to be twofold, with the infantry coming to the Union front and Stuart coming down to the rear. As far as I'm aware, there is no written documentation between Stuart and Lee that ever coordinated anything like this. Keep in mind, when Stuart rides out in the early morning hours of July 3rd at 6 a.m., Lee's original plan at that point was to keep up on the Union flanks on Culp's Hill and Little Round Top, so he had not yet changed his commands for a massive frontal assault. So Stuart would not have any idea what was about to happen there on Cemetery Ridge that afternoon. Now, this is probably going to be the most noisiest part of the video, as we're going to be approaching what would have been the Hanover Road in 1863. And on July 2nd and July 3rd, there would have been Union cavalry guarding the intersection just a little ways down. In fact, you could even see the sign for the modern-day intersection. That's the intersection of the Hanover Road and the Low Dutch Road. We have a detachment of a couple Union cavalry brigades under the command of David Gregg. And on July 3rd, they would have been guarding that crossroads. Because after all, if the Confederates got control of that, they can come behind the Union line and cause sheer chaos on the Union supply chain. Now, there was a lot of miscommunication, it appears, that was going on in the Union cavalry on July 3rd. One of Gregg's brigades were not down there. He got supplemented with a brigade from Kilpatrick's command, and that is the brigade of Michigan cavalrymen under command of George Armstrong Custer. So what you have here, folks, is you're going to have a 2 to 3 Union cavalry brigades, and they're all from different command structures. So there is another bit of a dispute of what happens here. Who is really in charge here on the Union side? Was it Gregg? Was it Custer? We'll find out. Now, when Custer's brigade arrives to help Gregg out, they're going to be supported with about 6 3-inch rifles of the command of Lieutenant AGM Pennington. Probably I should tell you what I'm reading off of. Lieutenant ACM Pennington. Pennington is with Custer's brigade. He's going to bring these ordnance rifle pieces out here. And later on, as we talk into the battle, they will have a very important role to play. Artillery will have a very important role to play here at East Cavalry Field. So, fair warning. Again, I am no expert on cavalry. And cavalry moves very quickly, very fluidly on a battlefield. This map here is going to give you a rough idea of all the different units that are going to be involved. We're up here roughly on what would have been called Crest Ridge. We're looking down toward the Rummel Farm, which would be right about there in the trees. So you're going to have attacks coming from the ridge, but you'll later have attacks of the Confederates coming directly into the field this direction. And then you're going to have the Union, they're going to attack both from the south, and they're going to be coming from the east as well. So multiple directions. It can get quite confusing. So we're standing on top of where Jeb Stuart plans to lay a surprise for Gregg's forces. He's going to bring a couple batteries up here. We actually have a howitzer behind me right now, and there's a 3-inch ordnance rifle just over my shoulder. He's going to put them on top of what is called Crest Ridge. And Crest Ridge is a pretty dominating view. Now keep in mind, a lot of the field is pretty more forced than it was on July 3rd, 1863. So you would have had a pretty good vantage all the way back over to the Hanover Road. He sees Gregg out there. Gregg is just starting to pull out, and around 1 to 2 o'clock here on the afternoon, July 3rd, Stuart opens fire, and Stuart's like, yes, I'm going to pin these Union cavalrymen. They're going to be scattered. I'm going to get some good hits. Gregg takes the firing, though, as a sign to ignore his orders to pull back, to pull to the Baltimore Pike. He's going to stay at the Hanover Road intersection. He's going to get some guns up there, one of them being commanded by Pennington. We actually just looked at Pennington's battery earlier. And Pennington is going to have such accurate artillery strikes up here in Crest Ridge that now you got to take this with a pinch of salt. But according to the reports, he got one of the cannonballs lodged into one of Stuart's guns, got it right into the muzzle. That's how accurate the Union artillery was attacking Crest Ridge. So Stuart's original plan to catch Gregg into a strap had kind of backfired. Now he's going to have to move his cavalrymen dismounted and have to fight the battle on the ground. So over my shoulder is the Rubble Farm. The barn would have been here during the battle. The stone farmhouse is built in the 1870s. But as the complex where several Confederate cavalrymen would have dismounted and taken position, firing with their weapons out in the open here. And a couple of them did not have a lot of rounds, maybe about 10 or 12. So they had to make every shot count. Now, being in that complex was a bit of a pickle for the Union, so they were going to bring over elements of McIntosh's brigade, which include the 1st New Jersey Cavalry, along with the 3rd Pennsylvania. They're going to dismount, and they're going to move across, from over here, across the field, and they'll start pushing toward the Rummel Farm. That's not enough. So that is then going to bring elements of Custer's brigade, including the 5th and 6th Michigan, to start dismounting. And over my shoulder here would have made the walk across the open ground toward the Rummel Farm. Now, of course, the person everybody wants to talk about here at East Cavalry Field is George Armstrong Custer, who just a handful of days before this event here, before this battle, had been promoted to Brigadier General status. So he's just recently taken charge of this brigade, and for the occasion, he has gotten a custom blue shirt, which will become that iconic blue Navy shirt you'll see him wear throughout his military career. He has a black coat on. He kind of was like a mismatched uniform, the one he's most associated with, through the red handkerchief art. And the reason he did this, he is a bit of a character, of course, but part of the reason he did it was they needed to get a uniform on him to show that he's in charge, and they didn't have much material to work with, and this is what his men could throw together. Now, although Gregg's forces out here were outnumbered by the Confederates. They did have an ace up their sleeve, and again, that is in form of 2 regiments in Custer's brigade, because the 5th and 6th Michigan, though very green troops, have been equipped with Spencer rifles. They are in fact the only 2 regiments at this battle that will be using Spencer rifles. Now, the carbine that comes a little bit later on was not used here. Those were not on his battlefield. But there were 2 regiments with the repeating Spencer rifles, and there's the famous story that you could shoot all 7 days of the week with it, because nobody was really yet used to repeating guns at this point. Now, the wayside marker here makes it seem like there was one grand charge of Custer here, but in fact there was actually multiple charges he made. The first charge, which is essentially the 2nd main unit attack, he actually brought the 5th Michigan out into the field, made a charge against Confederates down by the Rubble Farm. But the more grandiose one is what's being depicted here, the final Union assault of the day, where Custer rallies the 1st Michigans, gives his famous cry of "Come on, you Wolverines!" and begins pouring from the Low Dutch Road across these fields and toward Wade Hampton's Legion. And just because it's started with the 1st Michigan did not mean other units didn't get involved. The 3rd Pennsylvania and the 1st New Jersey, who by this point were licking their wounds up here in the woods, would rejoin, but pouring a crossfire down upon the Confederates out here. And their crossfire from the woods, coupled with Custer's charge, was enough to push the Confederates back behind the Rummel Farm, back to Crest Ridge. So this is the informational plaque on Hampton's brigade over here. They're commanded by Wade Hampton, who's pretty famous from the American Civil War, as he raised his own legion of soldiers, paid for them, outfitted them, did the whole 9 yards for them. He is here commanding cavalry of the 1st North Carolina Cavalry, 1st and 2nd South Carolina Cavalry. We have Jeff Davis and Cobb's and Phillips legions, and they're all out here. And they're going to come midway into the fighting here at East Cavalry Field. They're brought in as reinforcements. Stuart brings them up on Crest Ridge, tells them to go down there and chase those 7th Michigan men off the field, some of Custer's men. So they'll go down the hill, go in, and they're going to give Custer a good chase all the way across the field to the Hanover Road. But Custer had been pulled him into a trap, you see, because that's where Pennington's artillery is for the Union. And immediately, Custer is going to do a roundabout. Hampton's men are charging right into the Union artillery. They're smashed. Hampton's men pull back, and now this is what's going to begin Custer's famous charge with the 1st Michigan, and later all of the Michigan Brigade, and actually most of the men on the field will take part in. And Hampton's men will regroup here on Crest Ridge and make for one more charge out into the center, and roughly out there where the monuments are for the Michigan and the Gray Cavalry shaft, right there in the center of the field, roughly somewhere there, that is where the 2 will collide. Ultimately, Hampton's going to take a terrible slash wound to his back from a saber, and he'll have to be carried off the field. This reads like Custer, particularly the part where they go on about how the numerically superior force he faced and how he stopped, right there, General Jeb Stuart, who, in conjunction with Pickett's charge upon the center artillery to turn the right flank on the Union Army of the critical hour on the conflict upon the afternoon, July 3rd, 1863. Wow, I butchered that. But my point being, it's kind of hard to read. It's easier to read on the camera that is here. But my point being, there's the monument stating that Stuart was in conjunction with Pickett's charge. There's no evidence to support that. So this is pretty cool. We were filming the Barlow Knoll video yesterday, and I didn't know if there was any other flagpoles on the battlefield dedicated to an individual. Well, here we are with William Brooke Rawle, who is the Brevet Lieutenant Colonel of the 3rd Pennsylvania, does have a flagpole dedicated to him. Again, no flag up. I'm very disappointed. But he does have a flagpole dedicated to him. Pretty cool. So this is the monument to Company A, Purnell's Legion of the Maryland Cavalry. This is not to discredit the men that were part of this unit, but I was attracted to this monument for completely different reasons they would not properly understand. You folks have seen Apocalypse Now, correct? All right. You remember the helicopter commander, right? In the cavalry, right? Remember the actor that plays him. So yeah, apparently Robert Duvall time traveled from 1978 to film Apocalypse Now, to jump back to 1863, lead a different version of the Cavalry. Then he has to jump ahead in 2003 to play Robert E. Lee.
It's like poetry. It rhymes. It's just out here in the woods.
In 1884, elements of the 3rd Pennsylvania Cavalry organized funds to put this monument on, which is called the Gray Cavalry Shaft here on East Calvary Field. What's unique about it is, it's not necessarily what it's made out of. It's 29 feet tall, pretty prominent, especially considering some of the other monuments I've seen. It's very tall. It's made out of New Hampshire granite, but what makes it really prominent is some consider it the first monument to reconciliation here at the Gettysburg National Park. So, why it's considered reconciliation is there's actually signage for the Union participants at East Calvary Field and the Confederate participants at East Calvary Field. All of the divisions and ranks are listed on this monument, so men from both sides are memorialized on this monument. Now, there is some controversy of calling that a monument to reconciliation. When they dedicate this, the speeches that were given don't give the idea that the Union soldiers that commemorate this, they were given the idea they were doing this to say that we are done fighting the war, we honor the Confederates. What they were doing was, they got tired of hearing in all the reports that Jeb Stuart, the great Jeb Stuart, and his great cavalry raids and exploits, that he had technically won the day because the Union had not taken the field from him entirely. They were getting kind of stung by this impression that it was a stalemate here at East Calvary Field. And to ensure that people remembered what they had done here, they got a very tall monument, and they made sure that, hey, we're putting Stuart's name on it, but just to remind you, we beat Jeb Stuart. So, not necessarily is this a monument to reconciliation technically, but more in terms of wanting to reinforce what the Union veterans, particularly of the 3rd Pennsylvania, did here to defeat Stuart's Confederate cavalry on this field.
So really, this is just a 29-foot middle finger to Jeb Stuart saying, we beat you, do something about it.
Well, he can't do anything about it because he's dead by that point.
Well, exactly. This is quite literally the final middle finger of that argument.
So that's going to do it here at East Calvary Field. Thank you guys for watching. If you want to see more videos from me or from Humble Collector, check out both of our channels. There'll be links to both. We'll see you guys in the next video.